What was the moment when you sort of had the epiphany that you were not who you thought you were?
Oh, it was when I had cancer. I was diagnosed with two different cancers within 6 months of each
Oh
other.
my.
If you work during your treatment, you're not going to make it. You will not live the 7 months that's required.
What does that crisis feel like that you had this realization that you just laid out?
I'm going to have a nervous breakdown if I don't leave this company. I don't have it in for me. I don't have it in me. If I don't want to be her anymore, and if that's what my value was wrapped up in, what do I have left?
I love what you just said, by the way.
If you're new here, welcome. I'm excited that you've joined us. Every single week, I get to sit down with CEOs, leaders, founders, builders who are doing something really fantastic on the planet. They're building a business that's making a difference in other people's lives. And I get the opportunity to sit down and chat with them and learn how they're doing it, the lessons, the failures, the opportunities, and they're going to leave you and me every single week with some nugget, mini nuggets actually, that you can integrate, implement into your business to do the same thing. So I'm glad you're here. Sit back, let's get into it.
She built a 33-year career being whoever the room needed her to be, all the way to the top of corporate America, literally the top. Then 2 cancers in 6 months made her ask a central question that she had been running in her head from the day she was 12 years old, which is, who am I when I'm no longer performing? And this is Charlene Wheeless, and this episode is really dedicated to the people who have been asking the questions but not taking the time to listen to the voices giving them the answer. This is episode 100 of the Brand Laboratory, and I'm excited to share it with you. My guest today, she has spent 30 years, wow, as the person that companies called when everything was on fire. I like that. She ran global communications for businesses worth up to $40 billion. She has walked more than a dozen mergers all the way through to the other side and has rebuilt brands until the market paid a premium to believe in them. She was, by every definition, the woman who controlled the story, which is going to be the central thread of our conversation today. And then her body wrote a story that she could not spin. Mm-hmm. Charlene Wheeless is a leadership strategist. Welcome to the show, by the way, Charlene. A keynote speaker, a best-selling author, and a cancer survivor, and I might add the best dressed at the Royal Ascot in the UK. But somewhere in the middle of all this, the woman whose whole entire career was built on shaping how the world saw everyone else had to sit down and figure out who she actually was underneath all of this performance, which is a central thread of the work I do. So I'm really excited to dive into this in the lab today. What is really cool about the story is what she found became a system, sort of like what you're now doing. And she calls it choice over chance. And right. Which is amazing because I always tell everybody I speak to, my children included, you always have a choice in how you respond. And this is a lesson I've learned very late in life, by the way. So I'm really looking forward to that. And what you're doing today is you're teaching leaders who are tired of running their lives on default, which is really powerful. So today we're going to get into a conversation that I don't know that a lot of people sort of do on podcasts, but it's going to be the more personal side of Charlene, if you don't mind. Really centered around the moment that the performance stops working and you have to step into your true, genuine, authentic self because you have no other choice, right? And I think you call it the 7 seconds where courage actually lives. And what it really costs to put down this image and start leading from who you are. And I want to sort of jump into that. Again, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Brand Lab. I'm Devo. I'm your host. We are in our 100th episode, by the way. So happy 100 to you.
I'm very proud to be your 100th episode.
I know. I was really excited. I was looking at the numbers. I was like, wow, Charlene's going to be number 100 today. So we got to definitely call that out. It's interesting, and I want to sort of jump into this because, and then I'm going to let you sort of introduce yourself if you don't mind, because obviously I just sort of touch on the highlights here. I was having a conversation with a client just before this call, and we were sort of talking about this version of himself that has been running his business for the last 10 years. And at some point, he ran out of fumes. And he couldn't understand what was going on, but he was getting burnt out. He was tired all the time. He was fatigued mentally, emotionally, physically. He was dreading waking up to something that he had built and absolutely loved and couldn't figure out what had changed. And so as part of the work that we do, I don't really start with the business. I really want to start with the person and really understand, first of all, why did you start this business 10 years ago and what has happened in those 10 years? And then really start to unpack the things that he's having some arbitration around, if you will, with himself, right? And in the unpacking of that, it really turned out that he had been posing as someone his entire life not just in this business, but in his childhood and
Oh,
in
yeah.
his presentation to his wife and his family. And he started to realize through these conversations that he had not been showing up authentically in any way, shape, or form, and that it had become such a default mode for him, this behavior
Right.
that he was sort of acting out, that in the
Hmm.
process he had no idea who he was anymore, and he was so fatigued from what he couldn't understand. But it was this constant acting out of some
Hmm.
persona that he felt he had to portray in order to show up and have a successful business and run in the circles that he needed to
Right.
run in. And it was just it
Hmm.
was a fascinating conversation. And it's been, this is now, we're in our fourth or fifth week of work together, sort of watching all this unpack, and
Hmm.
really excited to sort of see where this goes. But anyhow, I talked about this about you in your introduction, and before we get
Hmm.
into that, I want to sort of hear you kind of introduce who you are. Specifically, what are you doing now besides going as a fashionista in the UK and all these other different things? But who are you working with? What are the problems that you're solving right now?
Yeah, so I think you did my introduction justice. So thank you, Devo. I don't need to add much more to that. And what I talk about, what I teach and coach, really comes from lived experience. It's not just a lot of theory. It's I know that what I teach works because I lived it, and it's really not far from what you talked about with your recent client in that, he did all the things and probably had all the things. And yet, he reached a point where he hit the wall, right? For me, hitting the wall was cancer, at least when I hit it really hard, and so the type of people I work with now are C-suite leaders, they're senior executives, and they're experiencing a lot of what you're talking about, right? It's like they're getting burnt out, they're tired, they don't have any energy. And I always say it's not that you ran out of energy, it's that you realized how much energy you were wasting by trying to be someone else.
Mm.
Right. And one of the things, like I don't coach only women, but I do coach a lot of women since I, climbed the ladder as a female, of course, is, when they come to me and they say, I'm an SVP, I want to be an EVP, or I want to be a CEO, or I want to climb that ladder. And the first question I ask them is, and I say, don't answer now. I want you to think about this. And in the middle of the week, answer, and it's going to drive how our coaching arrangement goes. And the question is, are you reaching for do you want that next rung on the ladder because you want it or because you think you should want it? And really think on that, because if you want it, I can help you get there. But if you're doing it because you think you should, then we need to have a completely different conversation, right? So,
Can I unpack that with you for just a
yes,
second? So,
absolutely.
because you want it versus you think you should, I'm just
Mhm.
curious, sort of a bit existentially, what's the difference
Mhm.
between the two?
Well, the difference is that you want it because you are genuinely excited and joyful about leading and running a business, right? Being a leader and helping others. That's what you are genuinely, um, you feel like you are born to do in the way of leading a company. The should want to do it are people who are raised to be achievement junkies. They're often, I say that, you are chasing validation, but you're calling it ambition, right? You're waiting for someone to say you're enough. So you're constantly reaching and seeking something that is always just outside of your reach, right?
I
And
understand.
also, and I'd say the other thing too to talk about in this is, there are trade-offs. Yes, you can be CEO of a $40 billion company, but you're not going home every day, at 5 o'clock. You're not putting your kids to bed. Even your nights, you're in meetings, you're at events, you're doing different things. You're going on fantastic vacations, but you're working while your family is going on without you, so there are trade-offs. And I really try to get people to understand, and it's okay to make the trade-off when you do it intentionally,
Mm.
right? When you do it because you think you should, that's when there's a problem, right?
So
And
that's sort of the performative model versus maybe more of a passionate model.
right, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's passion. I think the difference is passion with authenticity,
Mm.
right? Versus passion, again, because you are chasing validation, but you're calling it ambition, right? Some of the most insecure people I've ever met are people who are at the top of the food chain in their companies.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure you've seen it as well because they're afraid to lose. They're afraid to lose the title. They're afraid to lose the influence. They're afraid to lose the stuff. Right.
Can somebody who is genuinely authentic, though, who isn't the person at the top of the food chain that's insecure, can somebody
Mhm.
who is genuinely authentic actually achieve that same level of financial greatness, if you will? We'll call it sort of like the non spiritual side
Mhm.
of things, right? Because I would imagine if you're sort of kind of going through the work to become a
Mhm.
more authentic individual, that
Right.
and I'm not suggesting that you can't. This is a genuine question.
Mhm.
Do your
Right.
priorities just sort of intrinsically start to shift because the things that matter in the material world don't necessarily matter
Mhm.
because you now have a different awareness of things?
Right. Well, I mean, who's the most authentic than Elon Musk, our
I don't
first
know.
trillionaire,
I don't know.
right? I mean,
I don't think he's
as
human, just
that
between you and me. So
right, right, which would be authentic too. But if you think about it, and I'm not here to promote Elon Musk because I have my own views on that, but as best I can tell, he doesn't show up as anybody other than who he is. Now
maybe
you
that's
can
his
argue,
persona.
right?
No, maybe that's his branded persona.
Yeah, I don't know if you could fake it that much, but he was successful. But to bring it, to bring it down a few levels, I actually think you can be more successful when you are your authentic self. I think where we go wrong is we join organizations and companies where we try to be a culture fit
Mm,
rather than a culture contributor,
mm.
right? And the difference, because I had an entire career of trying to be a culture fit, right? And that's where we go wrong, because that's when we've joined a homogenous culture that rewards sameness.
You spent 3 decades doing that.
Oh,
What
absolutely.
was the moment? I'm curious if you can relive
Mhm.
that moment. It
Mhm.
might have been a series of micro moments. What was the moment when you sort of had the epiphany that you were not who you thought you were, and the reason that you were in the positions that you were wasn't actually filling up what you thought you needed to be doing?
Oh, it was when I had cancer.
And that
When I was
that was the catalyst itself.
yeah, I had cancer. I was diagnosed with two different cancers within 6 months of each
Oh
other.
wow.
And the first one, I'm very open with it. The first one was uterine cancer. And so I had a full hysterectomy, went back to work a week later, didn't think anything of it, actually. 6 months later, I was diagnosed with an advanced stage of breast cancer. And I was told that my treatment would be 7 months. And initially I thought, I know how to be an executive. I don't know how to have cancer. But
Mm.
it's 7 months. I can treat it like a project and everything will be fine. Well, my doctor sat me down and she said, Charlene, I've known you for a while. And so I'm going to tell you right now that if you work during your treatment, you're not going to make it. You
Mm.
will not live the 7 months that's required. Well, so I decided not to work. And my cancer treatment went from 7 months to almost 5 years.
Oh wow.
And in the middle of it is when I started having my identity crisis because I was no longer an executive. I was a sick person.
Hmm.
And 2.5 years into it, I went back to work. And for the first time, because I had stepped away from it, I saw all the crap I dealt with. I saw for the first time how I was turning myself inside out to be acceptable to other people. And I also saw that I didn't want to be her anymore.
Let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, by the way, and
Hmm.
amazing that you're still here. I'm glad that you are.
Thank
What
you.
does that actually feel like what you just described? What does that
Um,
what does that crisis feel like that you had this realization that you just laid out? But
mhm.
let's sort of like just pull back the covers for a minute.
Oh, sure,
What does that
sure.
actually feel like in the moment? Like, is this sort of like a slow trickle of information, or is it just you wake up one morning and like, holy shit, I'm a fraud? And I'm using my own words, not
No, no,
yours.
no, no. No, it's not quite that sudden, but the first thing you start to feel is a loss, right? Because, you know, the fact of the matter is, what is it my mother used to say? The cemeteries are full of indispensable people, So you start to realize that, you know, all of the things that you held dear and true that made you unique, that if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, or as I say, get hit by an Escalade, the world still goes on. So it seeps in slowly, but then something happens where you hit a wall, and the only thing you can feel is fear, right? Because suddenly you don't know how to walk through the world anymore. And I remember very clearly coming home one day, and telling my husband, I said, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown if I don't leave this company. And he says, "Oh, well, are you going to leave and just, become an executive at another company?" And I said, "No, I don't have it in for me. I don't have it in me." And if we're really getting down to brass taxes, the one thing that people don't talk about with cancer is the mental aspect. And when I was cancer free and after, 10 surgeries, I went to see a therapist, because I was depressed. And you say, what does it feel like? I felt like I wanted to die. I just didn't want to die from cancer.
Mm.
And nobody, when you survive cancer, no one gives you the room to be depressed. No one gives you the room to be lost, because everybody says to you, well, what's wrong with you? You should be happy. You just beat cancer. And for me, it was, yeah, I just beat cancer, but I don't want the life I've had. And I don't even understand the life that is unfolding in front of me, because I only know myself as an executive, as a high achieving, high performing, highly successful executive. And if I don't want to be her anymore, and if that's what my value was wrapped up in, what do I have left?
What were you? Sorry, I love what you just said. By the way, that emotional death that you were going through, rather than the
Mhm.
physical cancer death. Who were you before you became this woman running businesses and spending? Well, how many years was it? 30? What did I say? 30?
33,
You
33
spent
years in
33.
October.
Oh, there's a lot of numerology in 33. Have you ever
Right.
explored that?
Yeah.
Have you
Yeah.
ever explored the numerology of 33?
No, I haven't actually. I
That's a whole
haven't.
separate conversation.
Yeah.
That's an interesting number that was sort of the catalyst and the cataclysm at the same time. Interesting.
Right. Oh, I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's that emotional death you have, and you don't hear people really talk about it. I'm curious, and if I may,
And of course.
so you've been given sort of like a death sentence from a physical ailment that you
Hmm.
can't
Hmm.
control,
Right.
and that spawned sort of an emotional death that was probably
Mhm.
running on play behind the scenes for many years, I would suspect, right?
Yeah. Oh,
And
absolutely.
then suddenly you're hit with these two like monumental things, and they collide, and it's like, what the fuck, right?
Right. Yes,
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
like really. So, talk about a perfect storm. So when you have those sort of feelings of dread, of fear,
Hmm.
of this emotional death, but you also have the physical death looming potentially, what's the difference between the two? I'm curious. Like how does one feel versus the other? Is that something that you have ever thought about?
I don't think that I don't think I gave a lot of thought to the difference, right? If I were to think about the difference, the physical death you have no control over, right? It's either going to happen or it isn't, and you can control your attitude toward it. I think when you talk about that emotional death, that's a choice.
Is it?
Right.
Is it?
Yes, I think it's a choice to live in it or a choice to move past it.
But if you
That's
don't have any physical awareness or spiritual awareness of where you
mhm,
actually are because you've never done the work to
the deep
unpack who
work.
you are, the identity
Hmm.
work, then it's unfair to say that you have a choice at that point because you're sort of working in this sort of autonomous mode that you talk about, right? By default.
Right.
So when does it become a choice? If you're completely blissfully unaware of this
Hmm.
default mode you're running in, like when does that
Right.
become a choice?
Well, I don't think that it does become a choice if you're unaware. I
Yeah.
mean, God help us all if we could just walk blissfully through the world, unaware of, that we're performing or pretending or doing anything. I just don't know
Something strikes me that
people.
you wouldn't enjoy blissfully unaware.
Right. Yeah, probably not. But,
Yeah.
I think that most people of any kind of depth, or, at some point, come to terms with it. I see, I turned 62 last month. And so I have a lot of my friends are facing retirement.
Hold on a
And
minute. Wait a
oh,
minute. Go back. 62? Really?
yes, yes,
Well
I did
played. We need a
turn
round of applause.
62.
I mean, okay. What are you taking?
Thank you. I call it the chemo glow that's left over,
Wow,
Just the,
62. God bless
yeah.
you.
Yeah. And so, I have a number of friends who are facing retirement. They're coming up on retirement, and they're really afraid because now for the first time they are being faced with who are they, right? And they're having to address those heavy questions. Um,
I think that
it,
we can answer that based upon what I'm hearing you say. Like, when it becomes your choice is when you finally have the awareness because you've done some of the work to figure out what
right.
it is you actually want out of your life rather than just sitting on the treadmill.
Right.
I had this
Well,
conversation recently, ironically enough. I was having this
mhm.
conversation with somebody, and it's based upon this movie that I recommended that she watch. And there's this moment where he's engaged to a woman, and I forget something Midnight in Paris.
Okay.
Really good movie. And he's engaged to this beautiful woman, and they're touring France, and they're in Paris at the time. And they finish their dinner, and they walk outside, and it's raining. And he's like, "Hey, let's just have fun and walk to the car in the rain." And she's like, "Forget about it. I want nothing to do with that." And he's sort of got into this this
Mhm.
really introspective moment of like, don't I want to have someone in my life that would dance in the rain with me,
Uh,
right? And so I
right.
sort of recommended this movie, and she came back to me with this sort of diagnosis of the movie, and she was like, "Why is it always these moments of disaster, moments of despair, these moments of
Mhm.
pain that actually cause us to stop and think about what we actually want out of our life?" And it's an
Right.
interesting question, and I've sort of asked you the same thing, like, why is it so necessary in order for us to grow and expand and evolve, and whatever fancy word you want to give to transformation and movement?
Mhm.
Why does it always require pain to wake us up?
Well, my immediate response to that is if there's no pain, why do we need to wake up,
Yeah,
right? I
that's
mean,
the story of the Matrix.
right. If everything is working, right? If there is working, there isn't anything that needs to be fixed, right? I have been performing, since I was 12 years old. So, I had an incident when I was 12 when I realized that people were always going to define me if I didn't define myself. And the way they defined me was not going to be to my advantage, right? And so, because of something that someone said to me when I was 12, I spent the next 40 odd years being someone else.
What was that they said to you?
I let me just go back for a minute. So I was
At
raised in a
64 years old, and you're going back to 12, this might take us a while. I'm
well,
still
no, I
blown
think it
away.
could be every year.
I'm
And
still
I
blown
said,
away, just
yeah, yeah.
FYI.
I said 62, not
Oh, sorry,
64.
forgive me, sorry.
Yeah,
Faux
don't
pas, faux
age me
pas.
now. Don't age
I'm,
me.
I mean,
But
based upon what I'm seeing, you can do that, but carry on.
yeah.
I digress.
So very long story short, I was raised in an abusive home. I grew up in Oakland, California. I call it kind of the ghetto's ghetto.
Yeah, I've been
And
to
so,
Oakland.
right. So, as a little black girl, there was not much expected of you. There wasn't anything expected of you because you were invisible, you know.
Hmm.
And My mother left my father when I was 7. I have 3 brothers. They went to live with my father. I stayed with my mom. We rented a house from an Oakland Raider. Okay. And I don't know, the Oakland Raiders in the 70s were like big time.
Yeah.
And he gave us tickets to a football game. And I saw for the first time the Oakland Raiderettes. And
Okay.
they were gorgeous. They were sparkly. They were shiny. I was 10. I was like, they're not invisible. I'm not going to be invisible. And cheerleading is going to be the way that I'm going to make my way in the world. And I
So
just decided it.
so up until
Okay.
that point, because of the separation with your parents,
hmm
you felt invisible, or you felt invisible because of the dichotomy of growing up in Oakland as a young black girl. Like, is that what is all of that just sort of again the perfect
All
storm?
of it, all of it. Right. Yeah, and quite frankly, I was invisible. I did not matter to anyone except
Interesting.
maybe my mother. And so when I was 12, I was in junior high school and I tried out for cheerleader because this was my time, right? I was going to go make my way through the world. And I had some belief in myself that no one else did. And I made it as the fourth alternate, right? Which is like not making it at all. And I started to go kind of like, okay, well, I guess I'm really not going to be anybody. And the sponsor, they weren't called coaches then, the sponsor later put me on the team ahead of the other alternates. And I asked her why. And she said, um, Charlene, you were one of the best girls who tried out, but you're black. And I thought you'd be a troublemaker. So I didn't want you on the team.
Oh, wow.
But now that I've gotten to know you, I see that you're a nice little girl.
Wow.
That was my first moment of choice. And from then on, while I didn't have the words for it, as I do now, that is why my life mantra is it's choice, not chance that changes everything.
But before choice, not chance, from 10
hmm
years old up until the next 40 years, what would your
hmm
mantra have been?
Be who they want you to be in order to
Interesting.
be successful.
And so you did.
Mhm. So I did. So I left a lot of things to chance, and that chance worked out, right? So sometimes not making a choice doesn't mean things don't work out temporarily, right? And is that temporary time period going to be 5 years, 10 years, 30 years? I don't know. But for me, I knew, I had become the perfect Black female executive, right? I,
Before you continue that, the first thing,
uh-huh.
sorry, I hate to interrupt. I was just,
No, it's
I'll
okay.
forget things and I got to be cognizant of
Mhm,
time and I've got Martina pinging in my
mhm.
ear, all these different things.
Uh-huh.
I want to be cognizant of the sort of space around cancer itself because after doing that
Mhm,
for 40 years, I'm just curious your thoughts on this, if you've ever sort of dissected this and broken this down. Is there a correlation between the fact that were, you had chosen chance and because of that trajectory, and all of the things that you were doing that were not fulfillment in your spiritual alignment, that
mhm.
ultimately the cancer was sort of a creation of that stress, that duress, that falsity, all the different pieces that made you who you were actually not. I'm just
Mhm.
curious.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is a tremendous amount of energy that goes into waking up every day, putting on a persona, putting on armor, showing up the way you need to show up that may not be you. And all of that drains, I believe, the energy your body needs to fight off cancer cells. I used to say, before I had cancer, I was like kicking butt, taking names. I was killing it. But what I didn't really recognize is that it was killing me. And so, I can't separate cancer from a lifetime of pretending to be someone else. And don't get me wrong, that someone else was fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. It wasn't me.
All things being equal, Charlene
hmm
today versus Charlene. How long have you been sort of in this new operational
Um,
mode of yours? How long?
about 6 years.
Okay,
hmm
so
About
Charlene
6 years.
today versus Charlene at her peak, pre-cancer.
hmm hmm
What are the dichotomy differences between Charlene today and Charlene peak pre-cancer? Just curious.
Um, I don't wake up in the morning feeling like I have to prove anything, right? I don't have to prove I'm enough. I don't have to prove I'm worthy. I don't have to prove that I need to take up space. And for me, that is huge because for so long, every room I walked into, I had to prove that I belonged there or that I deserved to be there. I don't have to do anything I don't want to. And quite frankly, I don't. My number one value for I have other values, but my number one value for my business is don't work with assholes. Period. Hard stop. Right. Because I had to work with assholes, and I think where I see the biggest difference is in my relationships with people. And my kids will tell you, they're 32 and 30 now, but they will tell you that I'm a different person than I was. I've always been calm, that's why I've been able to do the type of work that I've done. But I've never been happier. Doesn't mean I don't get stressed out because I do, but I have energy to put toward things because I'm not putting it towards trying to meet someone else's ideal of what I should be, and just not just the energy, but just no longer carrying that burden is huge, is life changing.
I want to get to the some of the more emotional differences, if I may, for a minute. So,
Yes, of course.
outside of more freedom and autonomy and being able to
Mhm.
sort of explore the choices that you've made,
Mhm.
and I'm assuming at this point, and I'm not going to be nosy, but you had the financial freedom to do the things that enabled you to step away from it. I'm assuming at this point, after 30 plus years in a highly
Right.
so someone who doesn't have the financial resources to step away
Mhm.
from the corporation, but is up against a buffer of all the things that you also experienced was anxiety and stress and
Mhm.
pressure and inauthenticity and all the things that
Right.
caused the cancer and the walk away.
Mhm.
What would you say to someone who doesn't have the resources to walk away?
Mhm.
How do they step out of that space that's literally and metaphorically killing them?
Right. You step out anyway. You step out on faith, you step out on belief, because by stepping out, and it doesn't mean that you have to leave your corporate job or leave corporate altogether. It means you have to find the right place for you. But you're slowly dying. You made it, if you don't
Wait,
step
let me
out, you're
hold on. Let me stop you there. I just want to make sure I understood what you said. So if someone's listening to this episode and they're like, "Wow, this is powerful," but how am I ever going to walk away from that? You're
Mhm.
just simply suggesting that you don't necessarily walk away from the corporation or the world that you're living in. At least just not
Mhm.
yet. Maybe the role that you're in is forcing you into this survival crisis mode, and there might be a better fit for you somewhere else, even within the same company.
It could be in the same company. I'm not optimistic that it's in the same company because the culture is as the culture is, but the culture isn't the same everywhere you go. And you can find places where you can be a culture fit,
Mm,
excuse me, a culture contributor instead of a culture fit.
mm,
But recognize as long as you don't make the choice, you're dying, every day.
mm.
I talk to people now as a coach who are traumatized by the environments that they're in, and they don't think that they have a choice, that they have to show up every day. And what I try to help them see is, do you see how it's killing you?
Mm.
Do you see that you have stopped believing in yourself because others who don't even know you told you you're not worthy of believing in? You know, I had a job once, and I talk about this in my book. I had a job once that was so difficult, Diva, that when I got in my car at the end of the day and I had an hour commute home, I cried the entire way.
How long did
I
this go
mean,
on?
just 6 months.
Wow.
I stayed at that job for 10 years, by the way, but I cried the whole time until I turned the corner to of my cul-de-sac. And then I wiped my tears, I cleaned myself up, and I walked into my house like there was nothing wrong, right? Because at that time, I made almost $2 million dollars a year, right? And I didn't want anybody to know that I was unhappy. And yes, when I walked away from corporate, I had the money. But you know what? That money does not last as long as you think it
Oh,
does,
I know. Yeah.
right? And you go through times, I have times as an entrepreneur where my bank account is overdrawn because I've got customers who aren't paying me,
Yeah.
right? I hadn't felt that in 30 years. And but you know what? It's still worth it.
Well, let's talk about that for a second because I like the direction that you went with that.
Mhm.
When you're running your own business, I think a lot of people think, "Oh, you're running your own business. How cool is this? You work on Saturdays. Like, you can work
Right.
one day a week. Come on, man." I'm like, we're probably
Sure.
working twice the amount. I spent 15 years in the corporate world,
Absolutely.
so I know what that's like.
Okay. So you understand.
Yeah, and again, I don't have the same story as you in terms of some of the tragedies that almost
Mhm.
befell you, but I was literally dying inside, which is
Right.
why I walked away as well. And I just remember thinking, I have to find something that is going to enable me to just live a life that actually matters
Mhm.
to me rather than matters to someone else, right? That was sort of like
Right.
my epiphany.
Mhm.
But I remember starting my first business, and I was like, nobody prepared me for this. I had no idea. I just thought I have a really good idea. I'm going to go in, I'm going to rock
Right.
it. Everyone's going to love me. Everyone's going to love my idea. But I had never really done any of the sort of critical work that I'm now teaching people today to do. And I had no idea. So let's just talk about that for a second. In your
Oh, sure.
experience leaving the high stress, high stakes position that you were in the corporate world to now coming to running your own business, which is equally high stakes in their own regard.
Right.
Equally, I mean, you equally have equal anxious moments throughout the time. But what is the
Right.
difference at the end of the day when you're running your own business because you're
Mhm.
choosing to choice versus
Mhm.
working for somebody else, chance, and just sort of being subject to the women fancies of someone else's corporate
Right. Well,
autonomy?
here's what I tell people is that, when I worked at corporate, whether I worked hard for 2 weeks or I phoned it in for 2 weeks because I was burnt out, I still got a paycheck and I knew exactly how much that paycheck was going to be for, right? So when you have your own business, you are not assured that in any way, shape, or form. And it's scary. And I don't know if it ever stops being scary, right? Because you have to hustle. And it's the old, you can build it, but that doesn't mean that they're going to come. Now, I did have the benefit of having relationships, after more than 3 decades in corporate, and but it's hard, and I can build, similar to what you do. I can build a brand for somebody. I can rebrand a company in a minute. I can write the best crisis plan, etc. But branding myself,
Mm,
oh my gosh, that was nearly impossible,
yeah.
right? It was just, so yes, I love the freedom. I love the fact that I have choice, and that has become more important to me. But I'm also in a phase of my life where I'm not trying to acquire things,
Mm.
I'm not trying to acquire a better car, acquire a house. I'm not trying to put kids through college, so that freedom, it feels great because the burden is all on me, right? Where I think for other people who have a family, it's a bit of a different story.
I want to go to that branding yourself piece you just touched on
Mhm.
because that does require some conversation. I would imagine, not imagine, I know this to be true, but trying to brand yourself if you
Mhm.
haven't done the work on yourself to understand who you are in the first place, and for 30, 40 years, or how many ever years it was when you finally
Mhm.
walked away, 33 years, I would imagine that task is a bit monumental. So where did you start with yours so that you could better understand how to show up in this next phase of your life?
Yeah, I think it's still, I like to say sometimes I'm still a work in progress
We are.
because there is who you are and what you have to bring to the world. But then there's also, well, what are people willing to pay for?
Hmm.
Because that's not always the same thing. So I have been, iterating and reiterating, since I started my own business. But the one thing that's never changed is choice over chance. Right. That has been my through line all along. But, for a while there, everybody wanted a female minority speaker because they were all about DE&I. And even though I don't teach DE&I, everybody wanted a female speaker. Then suddenly people didn't want a female speaker. And then, but I wrote a book that I feel very passionate about. And then my publisher says, well, if you want to get on more stages, you need to write a business book so that you have something to talk about. And I said, well, that's not authentic to me. Right. So I'm not going to do that because, I'm not going to be that speaker who writes a book just so I have something to market so people will put me on their stage. So it's always, to me, it's a constant reminding myself of what my values are and staying aligned with my values, because that alignment is what keeps me in alignment. And so, if I had not done the work and kind of looked back on my life and said, what were the things that made me successful, aside from becoming the perfect Black female executive? And it was that somewhere deep inside, I always knew the power of choice, right? I've always known courage, and I've always been able to make decisions without fear, or at least.
So those are values that you held. We're going to call phase 1, phase 2 of Charlene's life. Those 3 values that I just heard, those were carryovers that sort of lasted and weren't shifted in phase 2 of your life, would you say?
I would say that they became more prominent in phase 2.
So you always had them, but you just didn't execute them intentionally.
Right. So I'll give you a great example. In one of the companies that I worked in, I was often given feedback that I stood out too much, that I should dress right, I should dress a different way, and I've always worked in very male-dominated industries and male-dominated companies. And even then, I knew I had a choice. Right. But in some cases, I ignored that choice. Right. So maybe I toned down a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit, in how I showed up instead of wearing bright colors. Right. There was a time in my life where I blended into the sea of blue, brown, gray, and black. Right. And then later on, before I got sick, I decided, you know what? I'm a girl. I have dark skin. I look good in bright colors. I'm showing up in bright colors. That was a choice too. And that choice had consequences, right? But I was willing to make it. And that's kind of the space I sit in now, is make choices with intentionality and know that there are going to be consequences. But if you make the choice and you own it, you're aligned with yourself.
I like that.
Right.
What's that fine line between rebellion and still actively being intentional about who you are, authenticity, but still meeting people where they are so that you can operate in the bubble of the society we live in? Because obviously, I mean, you can be an outlier all you want, but you still have to participate in the economy of things, right?
Absolutely.
So what is that balance so that you can maintain some of your individuality and your rebellious nature and your sort of like making choices, if you will?
Yeah. I don't think that I was ever rebellious, although I would call myself a trailblazer, because I think rebellion.
Aren't they one and the same? No?
No. I think rebellion comes a little bit out of anger, a little bit out of naivete, right? And probably a bit out of a lack of self-awareness, right? Where, being a trailblazer is that an example of being a trailblazer is, that job that I had where I cried, the whole commute home. I was the first Black female executive in that company. And I knew that if I succeeded, that I am paving the way for other people. That is being a trailblazer. Being rebellious is basically, with everything that came down the path, giving you the big middle finger and saying, screw you, I'm going to do it my way, right? That's, to me, just being difficult.
Interesting.
Right?
I'm going to have to reframe some of my values around myself, because I have been referred to as a rebel and I've taken that with pride. But so I'm going to do some meditation on this to figure this out.
Yeah.
Can we talk about being that only Black woman in a mostly male dominated conference room, building, etc. What does that feel like to you? Is that lonely? Is that isolating? Is it empowering? What does that feel like?
There's nothing empowering about it. It is soul crushing.
Mm,
It is, it is belittling
mm,
in a way. It's not empowering, it's disempowering. Because when you're the only and you're different, you have to prove
mm.
why you're there. And everybody is thinking it. Everybody is, they're just waiting for a reason to be uncomfortable with you in that room. I would tell people sometimes when I speak on panels or even when I give a keynote, I like to remind people that just because you have a seat at the table doesn't mean that everyone is comfortable with you being there,
Yeah.
right?
I don't argue with that, but how much of that is self projection, I wonder, based upon your own insecurities because you're living inauthentically?
Wow, well, that's a pretty deep question, actually. Um, and I, I I don't think that it's self-imposed because I can walk out the door today and I can have 5 encounters with people who will make me feel that I'm less than because I'm a woman and because I'm a Black woman.
Yeah.
And I don't have to search long and hard for it, right?
It's interesting as you say these things. And by the way, I have 9 sisters, so I grew up in an all-female family, and it's interesting.
Right.
So I sort of understand some of the things that women have gone through, and I fully appreciate that. And I'm a single father of 2 young teenage girls, so I sort of
Mhm.
see sort of this thing. But
Right.
as a white male,
Mhm.
living in a mostly male-dominated society for the last 45 years of my life, I can't say
Mhm.
that I clearly understand it from your point of view, but I've
Right.
certainly observed it and seen it, so I can only imagine what it
Mhm.
must feel like, right? And so
Right.
I guess I interrupted you. You were telling me your
That's
answer
okay.
about that before I asked for the projection. So you have these feelings that you described, whether it's shame,
Mhm.
whether it's fear, whether it's imbalance, all
Mhm.
the different things that you described, but yet you stayed in it for 33 years because you, in a way, you made a choice to
Mhm.
survive and thrive. So I'm just
Right.
curious in that space, what's the difference between choosing to survive, you made a choice to survive and
Mhm.
thrive, in a culture that you weren't fully in alignment with versus
Mhm.
choosing to walk away and live this environment you're living now? What's the difference between those two?
Purpose. I know a lot of people
Hmm.
who could never have put up with what I've put up with,
Hmm.
right? I also have 2 daughters. I have a responsibility to do whatever I can to make it easier for them,
Hmm.
right? I've had people when I've worked in companies, I've had young women tell me literally, I never wore heels to work before until you started working here and I saw that you wore heels. And so I figured it must be okay, right? I had a woman tell me once,
What's the metaphor for heels for you?
it's just a part of who I am.
I
And
know, but is
I,
there a sort of like a more existential piece to that thread that obviously she
oh,
saw it, she didn't wear heels. So
mhm.
what was her seeing you wear heels to work telling her metaphorically in terms of how she should be living her life now?
That it's okay to be a girl,
Uh-huh.
right? When you are surrounded by men and the power base is men, women will do a lot of things to almost outmen the men, right?
That's
I
funny.
mean, the day I show up at work in khakis and a polo, I've given up, right? I mean, I've just completely given up because I'm a girl. I'm a girl. I live in my femininity, right? And it was uncomfortable doing it when I was in corporate at the time I was coming up. But now I do it. I walked into a meeting the other day with a client. I was doing a training for a client. I had on gold studded jeans, right? And heels and a leather jacket, and I'm owning it, right? I don't care what they're having. This is me. This is who you hired, right? This is me, and I'm comfortable with it. If you're not, that's a you problem, not a me
I
problem.
love
Because
that.
I'm just showing up as I am, right? But
I know
there,
somebody who's listening to this episode right now, and I happen to wear leather pants occasionally because I like leather
uh,
chains and I ride a motorcycle. And she's
right,
absolutely devastated that I have a pair of leather pants. And I was like, "Girl, you do you. I'll do me. That's all there is to
right.
it."
Oh, absolutely. And I sparkle a lot, and because that's who I am, right? And that's just how I'm going to show up,
I want
but
to talk about something you said a minute ago.
okay.
This conversation is going a lot faster than I thought it would. So we might have to do part two if you'll honor me with that.
Oh, I absolutely would do part two with you.
Femininity, masculinity. It is a hot
Ah,
topic right now across a
it
lot of different
is.
things. I think it is being politicized and
Hmm.
manipulated, and these are just my personal
Right.
feelings about this. You all do your own thing. I personally think it's an initiative to just drive chaos and anarchy across society, so nobody has any idea what the
Ah,
fuck is going on. I
right.
believe in femininity and
Mhm.
masculinity and the balance of the two.
Right.
May I ask your opinion on this in terms of the global geopolitical scheming and whatever
Ah,
else is going on? Because you said, I love that I'm a girl. I love my femininity. Can you sort of address this a bit and sort of why there is a need for masculine and feminine energy? There's a need for balance around it.
well, if I go back to the workplace, and if I even take it out of the workplace, the power base, our structure as we know it was all built by men for men,
Absolutely.
right? And so I think that there are still a lot of people who believe that if they're going to be part of that, then they've got to tap into their masculinity,
Hmm.
right? They've got to be as masculine as the guys are, you know. I just don't buy into that.
Yeah.
I'm a girl. I love being a girl. I love looking like a girl. And, if being pretty makes you think I'm stupid, well, shame on you.
Shame on you.
Right. And I was walking down the street of London on Saturday before we flew home. And from the back, there was a woman and she had two little girls. They were clearly biracial girls. And they were holding hands and they're all walking. And I'm walking with my husband, who's white. And I said to him, I said, gosh, that could have been, us and our girls, 30 years ago. And someone stopped them in front of us. Someone stopped them, a woman, and she was talking about how pretty the little girls were. And so as we walked by, I said to the little girls, don't forget to tell them that you're smart too.
Mm, I love
And
that.
so when our girls were small, and that would happen because they're gorgeous, people would always say, "Oh my gosh, you're so beautiful," and they would respond with, "And we're smart too."
I love that.
Right. And so, to go back to your question, you can be pretty or you can be smart, but you don't get to be both. Right. Well, I'm proving that you can be both, and that is completely okay. Right. You can have fingernails if you want that are painted all different colors.
Hmm.
Be you. You will never be more powerful than when you show up as you. Right.
So that being said, I don't. Did we answer the question? What's that balance between
Well,
sort of
well,
being you said it trailblazer? What's that balance between being a woman, being smart, being beautiful, being a trailblazer, and still
yeah.
operating within a construct of a society that sometimes frowns on all of those things?
Again, it is you have a choice,
Mm.
right? You have a choice. I think bringing the most powerful self that you can to something is by bringing yourself there. I don't understand the women who think they have to become men, right? Men, male-like, because to me, that means that you've given up. Now, I think we're in a really difficult time now because women are being devalued, right? We're being devalued in the workplace. We're being devalued everywhere, right? And you just look at, assaults, and this is, I don't mean to take it to a dark place, but as an example, people throw out all of these stats on how many women are assaulted or sexually assaulted a year. When's the last time you heard a stat that said how many men were assaulting women?
Mm.
Right? So women are being defined as the weaker sex, or the weaker gender. By the way, this is probably controversial, but I do happen to think that there are only two genders, and I'm not changing my mind about that. Um,
I fully support you on that one, and I will never change my mind on it. Thank you.
what I want to say is I don't know why women are being devalued. Um, but I think I do know why women are being devalued. And it's because men are losing their value. And when you're going to lose something, you just grab onto it. Like
Wait, hold on.
as I
I
was,
want to better understand that. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but say that
that's okay.
again. Women are being, you said, you didn't say oppressed, but women are being attacked, devalued
Devalued.
because men are losing their value.
Yeah, and I think men are afraid of losing. And
Wait, hold on. What's that? Explain that to me. Men are losing their value. Explain that to me. What is that? What do you mean by that?
it's back to women are taking jobs that men think they should have, right? There are plenty of men out there who think men should be on boards, men should be CEOs, right? Now, all of a sudden, women are stepping up, right? Women are getting those jobs. And I think when you live in a state of scarcity, right? When you live in a state of scarcity, when things start to change, you grab onto whatever you have to, even if that means diminishing other people, right? And that's what I think we're in. I personally live in a state of abundance. I think there's enough for everybody. But our country runs on scarcity, 100%. And I think you only have to look at, I don't want to get political, but you only have to look at our political system to see people who are afraid of losing their power. So they're trying to take away other people's ability to have power.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening with women.
It's an interesting dichotomy that we live in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and yet we do
Mhm.
operate on this constant state of paranoia, panic, scarcity, fear, and this performative model that has been around for so long. And it is a very masculine model, by the way.
Oh,
If you do any
absolutely.
work on energy and you sort of understand feminine energy versus masculine energy, that's a
Right.
very masculine energy. But I do have a question. I'm curious. I started a men's group here in Charlotte, and just one of the reasons I started is because I was finding in a lot of my client work with a lot of my men, and this is a shout out for anybody who's interested in doing this. Please reach out to me. But men are very lonely right now, and
Oh,
this is not a she versus a
mhm,
men versus women thing. I'm 100% pro women, but I'm
mhm.
also curious your take on men, and because there is a tragedy underway right now, and I'm curious, is it because there is a disruption of power? Like the energy is shifting, both existentially, astrologically, physically. There is a shift. There is a balance that's sort of trying to correct itself, if you will. It's a cyclical thing, in my
Mhm.
opinion, but we can go down that rabbit hole another time.
Right.
But in the U.S. alone, and I know this is going on across the globe, but primarily in the
Mhm.
Western world, UK and
Right.
USA,
Mhm.
there
Mhm.
are roughly suicide 3 to 4 times higher by men than women. I think I saw a number. There were I
Mhm.
might be wrong on this, but 22 deaths per 100,000
Mhm.
population versus
Mhm.
5 for women. Why are
Mhm.
men? Why are men so depressed? Why are men committing suicide? Why are men at this sort of existential crisis period right now as
Mhm.
well? Because I think, and I'm asking because I think it goes back to a lot of the things you just said about fear and power and
Right.
corruption and manipulation by the
Mhm.
governing body right now, which is masculine in its nature. But I'm
Right.
curious what your opinion on that is.
Yeah, I think that historically and for years and years and years, men have had to be one thing, providers.
Mm-hmm.
And by being providers, they had all the control, right? Everybody was the man. They got to do what they wanted to do, etc. Now, the modern woman today doesn't need a man,
Mm-hmm.
right? Quite frankly, we don't even need men anymore to have a baby, right? We can go somewhere, get a little sperm, and we're good to go. We're making our own money, which means we're making our own decisions, right? We're becoming more independent. Now, think about if you were raised where you never even had to think about the fact that you were a man. You got jobs because you were men. You got better car deals because you're a man. You got served first because you're a man. And so that's how the world has worked. And now all of a sudden, it doesn't work that way anymore. Right. So I think that you talk about men having this existential or this identity crisis. I totally see it, right? Because, how many, ages ago, how many women, you know, got married and took care of their husbands because they needed to be taken care of, right? Well, they don't need to be taken care. A lot of women, don't need to be taken care of anymore. We can take care of ourselves. So all of a sudden, and I hear this from my single daughter, it's like all of a sudden, it's like you got to bring more to the table than just being a guy, right? And oh, by the way, you have to do more too. So I think the earth has moved under men, and they're not real clear on what they're supposed to do now.
The next phase of what that manhood looks like. I
Right,
can't say that I
right.
disagree with it. I think there's a lot of other layers to it, and this would be fun to
No,
actually unpack with you.
absolutely.
But all that being said, you still chose to marry. You're still married to a man. You're still involved in a relationship with a man. I'm just curious from this perspective that you hold, and maybe this is an evolved perspective than it was 6 years ago or 33 years ago. What does a man bring to the table for you in this relationship that you have? Like, why did you choose that route? If a woman doesn't need a man, and I'm not saying again, I'm not saying you do. I'm just
Right.
curious, what is the choice you made to still get married to a man? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I met my husband. I fell in love with him, and he's a great partner for me. And so, as I always say, I'm kind of his zhuzh and he's my stability, right? So we balance each other out and it works. Now I am fiercely independent and I think he would have loved for me to be less independent, right? Because the traditional balance is not there, right? And I with my daughters, I've had their boyfriends ask me if I made a mistake by making them so independent.
No way. Wow.
Oh yeah, yeah. And my one daughter who is just a firecracker, and I actually she had a boyfriend who asked me for some advice on how he could get her to do what he wants her to do rather than what she wants to do. And I said, you know what? You are just barking up the wrong tree, you know?
Wrong person to be asking that question to,
Right,
first of all.
exactly. Because I kind of do whatever I want. I mean, I might take my husband's viewpoint under consideration, but that's it. It's just under consideration,
What should a
So
modern man be more like in your definition?
Um, I think a modern man needs to work at the relationship. It's not just about being a provider, although that is still part of it. I think men have a lot of their identity wrapped up in that. But I think that you have to be an engaged father, parent, if you choose to have children. You have to work at being that partner and understanding your partner,
Hmm.
just like the woman does in the relationship. There
Hmm.
are two people in a relationship and both have to give equally in the aggregate, right?
I like
You
that.
know, it's like, I cook dinner 3 days a week because I want to. I kind of like that little trad wife side of myself,
Hmm.
but I'm not cooking dinner because I have to,
Hmm.
right? Because my husband expects me to, you know.
You said when I first asked you that question, you said that they
Mhm.
should be having conversations and communicating, etc. They should be better understanding, the partnership and what it looks like. But I would also like to add, part of that equation should be having these conversations about who you are as a man and how are you showing up. And it's
Right.
really important to understand it. And I talk about this a lot. It's really important, in my opinion, that before you can build a business, before you can have a successful career in any way, shape, or form, because you're ultimately going to get burnt out, you're
Right.
living proof of that, that it's really important that you do some more of the woo-woo existential spiritual work around who you are as a man, who you are as a human in general. We're speaking for both genders right here. But it's really important to sort of do that work. How do you show up in the world? What do you believe to be your line in the sand? What are your truths? What are your philosophies? What are your beliefs? What are the things that you actually want out of this life? Why are you building what you're building? Who do you want to surround yourself with? Like, what's important to you? And I don't think a lot of people spend a lot of time asking those really critical questions. And for some reason, they don't ask them. And then they get 30 years into their career, and I'm living embodiment of that. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? I have literally been spending the last 20 years making millions of dollars for another organization. I have no idea. If I were to be replaced today, nobody would know who I am a year from now. And so it's really important. I'm just curious your take on that. I can see you nodding your head, so I know you agree, but why is it so important that people, and this goes back to the curriculum of our modern education, like, why are we not learning these things as young school-age children? Why are we not being taught how to be critical thinkers, and why are the arts being removed from the curriculum? Why are we not being asked these types of questions early on? Like, I'm just curious your take on all this, because now you've lived in both worlds.
Yeah, it's, why do we choose to go through life rather than live life, right? Why do we talk about work-life balance and not life-work balance, right? I don't have, the answers to these questions, but I sure wish that people were taught that it's important to know who you are and that you can chart your own path, that you don't have to follow this one. There's more than one way to be successful, and there's more than one way to define success, right? But we're not taught that. We're not given the room for that. Something that drives me absolutely bananas, although it's not part of my life right now, is that when kids go to college, and when our girls went to college, they have to declare their major when they apply to college.
Oh, really?
Right? Now, how in the world?
I changed mine 5 times.
Right, exactly. It's like, because now you're applying to the College of Communication, the College of Engineering, the College of Math, the College of Economics, or whatever, right? How in the world at 18 years old are you supposed to know what you want to do for the rest of your life? Where does that make sense? What happened to come onto the college campus, and your first 2 years, you're just getting a really great liberal arts education so that you can then determine what you want to do with the next part of your life, right? And I think that's kind of a microcosm of, decide now, know now, move. This is the way things happen. This is, this is the only path to success. This is how, the world works. And it's bullshit.
It is
right?
bullshit.
We buy into it. It's bullshit. It makes us sick. It makes us miserable until, God help us, we hit a wall and we wake up and we say, I'm not living my life anymore.
Yeah. I wouldn't wait till college. I'd take that all the way back to elementary school and before. These choices should be given to children. For example, and we're getting off target, but yeah, like, it's crazy to me that they tell you the only choice is to go to college. Like in high school, they push you into college so that you can be in forever perpetual debt, so that you can continue the same cycle of living in a prison cell for 8 hours a day and doing nothing. Anyway, I'm going down my rabbit hole.
No, but no, I am right there with you. Is that we don't teach people that they have choices, right?
This is where a rebellion nature can help us out, because we are going to buck the system and change it. All right. I have one more serious question that I'm sort of just kind of like been toying with in my head. Then I want to get into like the last part, which is the hot seat, and just get a few seconds to answer these questions. Then I'll let you go. Thank you, by the way, again, for being here, Charlene. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course. This has been a great conversation with you.
Yes, it has. Thank you. I really appreciate all your insights. In terms of this whole idea of choice, not chance, and I fully subscribe to it. Again, we talked at the outset. You always have a choice in how you respond, no matter what it is. Whether you get
Right.
cut off on the road, whether somebody does something to you that you find offensive, whatever it is, you always have a choice in how you respond, right? And in that response, a new ripple of opportunities are formed, an infinite number, perhaps. I think, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So I love that. But you didn't get a choice with cancer. This sort of.
No.
But hold on, I'm going somewhere. You didn't get a choice. You didn't get to choose receiving cancer. So I'm simply curious. Like, what's your thought on things that happen to us that we are completely out of our control? And I think I know what you're going to say, but I just want to hear you say it. Cancer was out of your control. You had no control receiving that, or did you? Because you didn't make the choice early on in life to follow the trail that would have probably not catalyzed the stress, the anxiety, the pressure, all those things that actually cause cancer. So that's a bit of sort of like a round robin way of getting up into the question, but there are things that are out of our control that sometimes happen to us that are not in my best alignment, right? So how does one control something that's uncontrollable? How does someone choose something that happens to them that's uncontrollable?
Well, I do believe that a lot of things can be unwound to a point where you relied on default rather than making a decision. I would say in my cancer journey and getting healthy, particularly from an emotional perspective, was that I had to forgive myself for getting cancer. Because I am confident that because I made the choice to live out of alignment, to live in stress, to let other people determine my destiny, led me to a point where I had cancer. And people can argue with it, but I will tell you, Devo, nothing will change my mind about that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I sort of was kind of leading into that in when I was just asking that question. It's a bit sort of out there for some people, I would imagine. Like I hate the word woo-woo because people just like to conveniently use that for something they have ignorance around or naivety around, so they call it woo-woo. But have you ever explored any of these woo-woo? Do you actually know the benefits?
Well, I'm kind of leaning into the woo-woo these days.
I'm fully leaning into it. I've been down that rabbit hole for about 10 years now. I'm fully on board with the woo-woo. Just last line of questions, and I interfere with this sort of like just curious, fun questions. So hot seat them. We're not going to spend a lot of time on them. Is there anything that you are still apologizing for or forgiving yourself for?
When I was sick, when I had cancer and I was sick, both of my girls moved home. And I put on every day the bravest face that I could for them. And then when they'd leave the room, I'd fall apart. And what I didn't know is that when they left the room, they fell apart too.
Shoot, yeah.
You know, I had an opportunity to show them that it was okay to be vulnerable, that you could still be strong and hurt. And I didn't do that.
Interesting.
And I regret that. I so regret that.
How would that have changed your relationship with them today had you made that choice then?
Well, we have a great relationship, but I'm constantly having to remind them that it's okay to not be okay. You don't have to pretend, and it's okay to ask for help when you need it. And that I was not a good example of that at all.
We do live in a society that shames asking for help and shames vulnerability and shames being out of control and shames being depressed. Like it is sort of, and I don't say this sort of lightly. I've traveled a lot around the world, and different cultures have different perspectives on this. But here in America specifically, we do shame that sort of behavior, and it is sort of and if again, not to harp on this point, it's a very masculine energy of shame. And so again, I'm all about manpower too. I'm about balance power, so I'm not trying to take that rabbit hole. But it is an interesting thing. Next question. You've been in the room with billion-dollar executives, right?
Yeah.
What's one of the dumbest things you've ever seen a billion-dollar executive do?
There have been so many, but
I've had my fair share of them. I love hearing these stories.
Right. Yeah, I would say this is going to sound kind of crazy, but being in meetings with executives and then who have the titles and everything, and they then get down on people who are ambitious and who want the title. Why do they need to be a VP? It's just a title, right? Well, the only people who say it's just a title are the people who already have them, right? And so that drives me crazy. And the other is just, and this is a big one, but billionaires get billionaire's disease. And they get twisted up over the most petty shit because they're so used to being surrounded by people who will make their lives exactly as they want them at any time. I once received a horrifying email from a billionaire because I made something on an 11 by 17 sheet of paper instead of an 8 by 10 sheet of paper. Right.
Petulant.
And the guy went personal, right, in his attack on me. So much so that and he did it in front of everybody, of course. And the head of HR the next day apologized to me. And I said, "Oh, no, 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 no." I said that whole thing said way more about him than it could have ever said about me. I said, so no, I'm not under my desk. But, it's billionaires are just, they don't make decisions, right? They just make people feel bad for not making them.
Yeah.
It's, and again, I'm putting people in a big group. And so
for sure. But we're just storytelling here. It's okay. I had an executive early in my career, and you'll appreciate this story. I was a bit of sort of an outlier early in my corporate career. I just don't really care. I just don't. I'm very curious, and I just want to see growth, and I always wanted to see transformation and process improvement. And I was very much rebellious early on in my corporate career. But I had just completed a project that apparently I had overstepped my bounds in various ways. I didn't follow sort of like the political red tape of the environment, and I didn't. This sort of stuff doesn't even exist to me in my head. Right. But my executive vice president at the time calls me into his office. And he's like, "You've pissed a lot of people off today." And I was like, "Well, how much money did we save in this project?" And it was like, this wasn't like peanuts. I had saved the company several millions of dollars on a project that I had just started. I'd been at the company for less than 2 weeks. And I was like, "Well, how much money did I save you?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's not the point." And I was like, "How did you become an executive vice president? Did you become an executive vice president by following the rules in every situation, in every context?" And he's like, "Okay, point made." And I just, so there was to your point. It's like, okay, come on, let's be real about this for a minute. All right, last question.
But they forget that, though.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They forget that, and then they become the automatons because suddenly they have too much to lose.
Well, they also have people that may be over them as well that are sort of whether they're stakeholders or things of that nature. That was one of the things that always blew my mind away. Is like you're running a company, but you have a separate group of people that are running you, making you run the company the way they want because they need more profits from it. And I will never understand that model. I don't care how much money you make or how powerful you are. I will never understand that model. So, and you're never going to convince me. Anyhow, last question. You sort of been in these rooms. You are where you are today, right? In today, if your 30-year-old self were to walk into the room today, mid-career, what would she think of you?
She'd say, "Damn, she did it."
But that's from your lens now. Her lens is mid-career, inauthentic, climbing the ladder, on the treadmill. She's using chance, not choice. She doesn't have that frame. She doesn't have that self-awareness. She walks in the room and she'd be like, "Wait, let's pretend she doesn't know who you are. She just sees you." What would she say?
I think she'd be very curious. I think she'd say, "I kind of want to be like her, but I also want to know if she knows that she's not like her," right? I think that to somebody walking in the room, I would have been a really interesting person to have a drink with.
Now or 30-year-old?
A 30-year-old at 30, yeah.
Would you not be interested to have a drink with today?
Oh yeah, no, now.
Who would be more interested to have a drink with? Today, 62-year-old or a 33-year-old?
Oh, me today. Absolutely, without a doubt, because I'm fun, damn it. As I tell my husband all the time, my husband of 35 years, I say, "I'm fun, darn it."
Were you not fun at 33?
No, I was not
Interesting.
fun at 33. No, 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 no. I was not fun at 45. I was
Interesting.
very, very serious.
You're in the renaissance of your
All,
life now.
yeah, all the
Interesting.
time. You know,
Interesting.
I tell my husband, I say, we are in the fourth quarter of our lives. Are we
Hmm.
gonna punk out and kick a field goal, or are we gonna try to run it in? And we're gonna try to run it in, which
Interesting.
means we're gonna do everything that we can that matters to us, including having an impact on others until we can't.
I love that. Are you a
Yeah.
football fan?
I am a football
Who's your
fan.
team?
Oakland Raiders. I don't care that they're in LA. It's the Oakland Raiders, although I did cheer for the Washington Redskins for 4 years.
I don't really watch sports anymore, but growing up, I
Mhm.
was a huge Oakland Raiders fan, I'll have you know. And the only reason I was
Yeah.
originally is because my grandfather was a big Denver Bronco fan. And
Uh,
back in the 70s and the 80s, they were like ultimate
mhm.
rivals of all rivals, right?
Right,
And so just I was
right.
really my grandfather was really I was really close with him, so I became an Oakland Raiders fan just to sort of razz
That's
him, and we'd get together and watch the games whenever we could. But yeah, if I were to
yeah.
pick a team, it's also the Oakland Raiders or the Las Vegas.
Yeah, I love the Raiders, and people expect because I cheered for the Redskins when they were the Redskins. People always think that my NFL team is the Redskins now the Commanders,
Amazing.
and tons of respect because there was nothing like being in RFK Stadium, 50,000 people, and Coach Gibbs was the coach at the time, and it was amazing. But nothing takes the place of 10-year-old me at that Oakland Raiders game.
The Raiderettes. I just
Yeah.
met Coach Gibbs.
Did you
Yeah,
really?
because
For
he's here in Charlotte
Formula
for
One?
yeah, no, NASCAR. He has a
Right, right.
NASCAR team, and he was literally at the
Hmm.
race. So I NASCAR, I do work for NASCAR,
Hmm.
so I get to go down to where like all the really important people go and just
Oh,
kind of like,
great.
yeah. And he was there,
Yeah.
and I met some of the racers. It was really cool. Anyway, he doesn't look any different really. He's just a little bit more bent over than he was, but he still looks really
Right.
good for his age. So you and
Yeah.
he are on the same program. Well done. All right,
Yeah.
ladies and
He
gentlemen, Charlene Wheeless, thank you so much. Speaker,
Of
coach,
course.
leadership strategist, trailblazer, not rebel, and
Yeah.
the winner of the best dressed at the Royal Ascot races. I appreciate you being in the lab today.
Great.
It's been a really scintillating conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Devo. It was great to be in conversation with you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. Website is charlenewheeless.com, but I know a lot of times people can't spell Wheeless. Two E's, two L's, no, two E's, one L, two S's. See how confusing that gets?
Yeah, you didn't
So
even know how to spell your own name. You're talking shit
I
about
know,
everyone
right? Right.
else.
So hit me up on LinkedIn and or just Google choice not chance, and 9 times out of 10 I'll come up.
Love it. Brilliant. Thank you so
All
much for
right.
being here. What an episode. Wow. I know you hear me say this for every single show that I do, but the guests, the people that I am attracting into my energy vector, are just powerful people that have a really powerful message, and I'm just honored and humbled that I have the opportunity to share it with you. Charlene was no exception to that, and she spent a lifetime earning a seat at the table, and the real victory for her was finally being able to sit in it as herself, her authentic, genuine self. Her entire message comes down to 4 words that you can carry into your next hard moment. It's choice, not chance. Decide who you are on purpose, and the rest of your life starts to follow. I'm Devo, host of the Brand Laboratory. I'll see you next time. Thank you for being here. All right, that's it for today, folks. Thank you. If this episode hit you, like it, subscribe it, leave a review. It helps a lot more than you think, and it helps the right people find this show and help us keep growing so we can continue to produce amazing episodes. You can find me at thebrandstoryteller.com if you're interested in connecting with me, and everything else about this episode, the guest, the websites, the social media handles, they are all linked below. I'll see you in the next show.